It was a bet. Ji-hoon smirked at their wedding, cameras rolling. I never loved you. Amanda collapsed as Seoul watched her humiliation go viral. Just another foreign girl dismissed, mocked, destroyed for entertainment, until her boss saw the video. Seong-ho had loved his assistant in silence for 3 years, keeping his distance, staying professional. Watching her break on a stranger's phone shattered every wall he'd built. Welcome back, my amazing viewers. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to comment below where you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Amanda stood beneath the floral arch, her ivory gown catching the golden light. The dress had cost 3 months of careful saving. She checked her phone again. Ji-hoon was now 45 minutes late. The sound of laughter reached her ears. Ji-hoon walked through the garden entrance, but Soo-min, her best friend, clung to his arm like a possession. Behind them, a cluster of his friends followed, phones already raised. Amanda's smile of relief froze into something unrecognizable. Sorry we're late, Ji-hoon called out, his voice carrying an edge she'd never heard before. Had to make sure everyone could make it to the show. The group formed a loose circle around her. Amanda's hands trembled as she clutched her bouquet. Ji-hoon, what? Tell her, one of his friends urged, barely suppressing a grin. Ji-hoon's handsome face twisted into something cruel. It was a bet, Amanda. My boys wagered I couldn't string along an African girl for a whole year. I won 2 million won. He pulled Soo-min closer and got a better girlfriend out of the deal. The words didn't make sense at first. They bounced off her consciousness like stones skipping across water. Then they sank, dragging her down with them. We've been documenting everything, another friend said, waving his phone. Your terrible Korean pronunciation, that hilarious thing you do when you're nervous. God, you were so easy. Soo-min stepped forward, and Amanda saw something volcanic in her former friend's eyes. 4 years I watched everyone at work praise you. 4 years of listening to Seong-ho say how reliable you are. You thought you were so special, didn't you? Coming here with nothing, acting like you belonged. Soo-min, please, Amanda's voice cracked. I've been sleeping with Ji-hoon for 5 months, Soo-min continued, her smile razor-sharp. In your apartment, actually. That weekend you visited Busan? We broke in your bed. The laughter grew louder, feeding on itself. Someone mimicked Amanda's accent, exaggerating every syllable. Another replayed clips they'd secretly filmed, her crying over an argument with Ji-hoon, her practicing Korean phrases, her dancing at a Christmas party. Oh, and that 50,000 you gave me for my business venture? Ji-hoon added casually. Spent it on a car. Nice one, too. $50,000. Every penny she'd saved over 3 years. Money meant for her cousin's school fees, for emergencies, for a future she'd believed in. Gone. You really thought someone like me would marry someone like you? Ji-hoon's words were surgical in their precision. You were a project, a joke, and you fell for every lie because you were desperate to matter to someone. A hand shoved her shoulder. She couldn't see whose. Amanda stumbled backward, and the carefully preserved gown tore as she caught herself against a chair. Mud splattered across the ivory silk. The world tilted sideways, her chest constricted, each breath a battle against rising panic. 4 years of friendship, built on calculated deception. 18 months of love, choreographed cruelty. Every gentle touch, every whispered promise, lies wrapped in prettier lies. Her knees hit the white runner. She couldn't feel them. The phones formed a constellation of gleaming eyes above her, recording, always recording. Their laughter became a physical thing, pressing down on her shoulders. This is gold, someone said. #heartbreak, #catfished, hashtag... The garden spun. Amanda's vision darkened at the edges. She heard herself making sounds, not quite crying, not quite breathing. Just the raw noise of something breaking. Within 30 minutes, the video was everywhere. African bride scam trended nationally. Comments multiplied. She deserved it for being so stupid. Why would she think a Korean man would actually marry her? Some defended her, but their voices drowned in the flood of mockery. Across Seoul, in a glass-walled conference room, Dae-jung scrolled through his phone during a tedious contract negotiation. The trending video auto-played. He recognized the garden, then the dress, then the woman collapsing in it. Amanda. Quiet Amanda, who remembered his daughter's nut allergy, who'd stayed late helping audit the charity accounts. His blood crystallized in his veins. He burst into Seong-ho's office without knocking. "Boss, you need to see this. Now?" Seong-ho's eyes was fixed on Dae-jung's phone screen, watching the video play through once. His expression remained perfectly neutral, the same mask he wore during hostile negotiations, during confrontations with rivals who'd miscalculated badly. "Play it again," he said quietly. Dae-jung hesitated. "Boss, maybe again." The second viewing crystallized something cold and terrible in Seong-ho's chest. He watched Amanda collapse, watched the phones circling like vultures, watched her break in real time for the entertainment of strangers. For 3 years, she'd sat 20 feet from his office door. 3 years of her arriving 15 minutes early, staying late without complaint, remembering every employee's birthday with handwritten cards. He'd noticed her from the first interview, the way she held herself with quiet dignity despite her nervousness, how her competence spoke louder than her hesitant Korean. He'd noticed Ji-hoon too when the relationship began. Noticed, and said nothing because Amanda had smiled more, laughed easier. Seong-ho had told himself it wasn't his place to interfere, that he was being professional by keeping his distance. Now, watching her devastation loop endlessly on a stranger's phone, professional distance felt like complicity. He stood abruptly, buttoning his jacket with mechanical precision. "Get the car, now." Dae-jung was already moving. "Where are we going?" "To fix my mistake." The drive took 18 minutes through evening traffic. Seong-ho's jaw remained locked, his hands steady despite the fury building like pressure behind a dam. He'd built his reputation on control, over his emotions, his empire, his enemies. But watching that video had fractured something fundamental. This wasn't business. This was personal in a way he'd avoided examining too closely for 3 years. They found her exactly where the video's geotag had indicated. The garden venue looked obscene in the fading light. It's romantic. Trappings mocking the woman sprawled on the white runner. Amanda's dress, that beautiful ivory gown, was torn and mud-stained. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, her eyes unfocused. Nearby, Ji-hoon's group posed for selfies, their laughter grating against Seong-ho's eardrums like metal on bone. His entrance created a ripple of silence. The smart ones recognized him immediately and stepped back instinctively. In Seoul's particular ecosystem of power and money, Seong-ho occupied a tier where even mentioning his name required caution. His legitimate businesses provided cover for operations that existed in moral gray zones, and his reach extended into places polite society preferred not to acknowledge. Ji-hoon, flushed with alcohol and the intoxication of cruelty, didn't possess his friend's survival instincts. "Can we help you?" Ji-hoon's tone carried practiced arrogance, the confidence of someone who'd never truly faced consequences. Seong-ho's voice emerged soft, deadly. "You filmed this? You humiliated one of my people and broadcast it for entertainment?" Understanding flickered across several faces. People began edging toward exits. Ji-hoon laughed, the sound false even to his own ears. "Come on, it was just a joke, man. No harm done. Business is business, right? You understand how it is." Seong-ho moved with the economical violence of someone who'd learned to fight in places where hesitation meant death. His hand closed around Ji-hoon's throat. Ji-hoon's eyes bulged, his hands scrabbling uselessly at Seong-ho's grip. "Give me one reason," Seong-ho whispered, his face inches from Ji-hoon's purpling features, "why I shouldn't break every bone in your worthless body." "Boss," Dae-jung appeared at his shoulder, voice carefully neutral. "We need to contain this first." Seong-ho released Ji-hoon, who collapsed wheezing. "Every phone, now. Delete every video, every post, every trace of this. Anyone who resists, remember their faces," while Dae-jung and 3 other men who'd materialized from the car executed these orders with efficient brutality. Seong-ho crossed to where Amanda lay. He knelt beside her, and the rage that had propelled him from his office transformed into something infinitely more frightening: tenderness. "I'm here now," he said, his voice shedding its harsh edges. "You're safe." Her eyes struggled to focus on his face. "Mr. Min?" "Shh, I've got you." He lifted her carefully, shocked by how light she felt, how fragile. She'd always seemed so self-sufficient at the office, quietly competent and unshakable. In his arms, she felt breakable. The realization sent fresh fury coursing through him, not the explosive kind, but the cold, patient variety that planned and executed revenge over months. As he carried her to his car, Dae-jung fell into step beside him. Seong-ho's instructions came clipped and precise. Find out everything about Park Ji-hoon. Every debt, every secret, everyone he's crossed. I want his complete financial history on my desk in 2 hours. The girl with him, Soo-min, same treatment. And everyone else who was here, everyone who laughed, everyone who filmed. I want names, addresses, employment records, everything. Where are we taking her? Dae-jung asked, opening the car door. Seong-ho surprised himself with his answer. My home. Not a safe house, not a hotel, not even the corporate apartment they used for protective custody situations. His private residence, the penthouse sanctuary where business never intruded, where he kept himself separate from his empire. Dae-jung's eyebrows rose fractionally, but he said nothing, closing the door gently after Seong-ho settled Amanda against the leather seats. His personal doctor arrived 30 minutes after they did, a discreet woman who'd learned not to ask questions. Her examination was thorough but efficient. Dehydration, acute emotional trauma, shock. Physically, she's stable, but emotionally, she trailed off, meaningfully. I've given her something to help her sleep. She needs rest more than anything. After the doctor left, Seong-ho stood in the hallway outside his guest room, staring at his hands. They trembled slightly, not with rage anymore, but with the ghost of how close he'd come to losing something he'd never allowed himself to reach for. 3 years of professional distance, of telling himself that his position made any approach inappropriate, that she deserved better than the moral complexities of his world. Now she lay broken in his guest room, because he'd been too much of a coward to warn her about Ji-hoon. The files Dae-jung delivered were comprehensive. Park Ji-hoon's life unfolded in spreadsheets and bank statements, a trust fund baby who'd burned through his inheritance on gambling and bad investments, propping up his lifestyle with increasingly desperate loans. His company existed more as fiction than reality, leveraged beyond sustainability. He owed money to people who made Seong-ho look merciful. And there, buried in the financial records, multiple transfers totaling $50,000 from Okafor. Amanda had been funding his delusions. Seong-ho felt something crack in his chest. He made phone calls through the night, his voice calm and surgical. Each conversation planted seeds that would bloom into Ji-hoon's systematic destruction. By dawn, he'd set wheels in motion that would grind slowly but thoroughly. As sunlight painted the city gold, Seong-ho returned to the guest room. Amanda slept deeply. Tear tracks dried on her cheeks, one hand curled near her face like a child seeking comfort. He lowered himself into the chair beside her bed, studying her face in the gentle light. For the first time in years, perhaps since he'd clawed his way up from nothing, he allowed himself to feel something other than cold calculation. He allowed himself to care, to hope, to imagine a future where she might look at him without seeing a rescuer or an employer, but simply a man who'd loved her quietly from a distance for far too long. Consciousness returned in fragments, soft sheets against her skin, sunlight filtering through unfamiliar curtains, the absence of sound, not silence, but the particular quiet of a space insulated from the world's chaos. For 3 perfect seconds, Amanda existed in the blank space between sleep and waking, unencumbered by memory. Then it crashed back. Every word, every laugh, every phone raised like a weapon. Ji-hoon's casual cruelty, Soo-min's venomous confession, the feeling of her knees hitting the white runner, the world tilting sideways, the mud-staining ivory silk. $50,000, 3 years of her life, gone. 4 years of friendship revealed as elaborate deception. 18 months of love exposed as a bet, a joke, a game played for pocket change and entertainment. Amanda curled into herself, drawing her knees to her chest. The tears came silently, soaking the pillow, her body shaking with the effort of keeping the sobs contained. She'd learned early that loud grief attracted attention, invited questions, demanded explanations. Better to break quietly, to shatter where no one could see the pieces. A soft knock interrupted her dissolution. She didn't respond, couldn't, but the door opened anyway. Seong-ho entered carrying a lacquered tray, tea in a delicate ceramic pot, rice porridge, sliced fruit arranged with careful precision. He set it on the bedside table and settled into the chair across from the bed, maintaining deliberate distance. In 3 years of working for him, she'd never been this physically close for this long. At the office, he was a presence glimpsed through glass walls, a voice delivering instructions through Dae-jung, a signature on her paycheck. Here, in the morning light of his guest room, she noticed details she'd missed, the faint scar across his jawline, the way his hands, large and capable, moved with unexpected gentleness. The exhaustion, etched around his eyes, suggesting he'd slept as poorly as she had. "You're safe here," he said quietly, "for as long as you need." Amanda's voice emerged raw, unfamiliar to her own ears. "What happened? I handled it." His tone carried finality, the same one he used in business meetings when a decision was made and discussion closed. "What does that mean?" Seong-ho studied her for a long moment, seeming to weigh how much truth she could carry. "You work for me. That means you're under my protection. What happened yesterday was an attack on one of mine. I responded accordingly." "Accordingly how?" Something in his expression made her push. "Mr. Min, what did you do?" He leaned back, steepling his fingers. Park Ji-hoon's business partners withdrew their support overnight, approximately 200 million won in agreements terminated. His banks are calling in his loans, all of them simultaneously. Several investors who'd been considering his proposals received information about his financial irregularities and fled. His company's stock value has collapsed. By this afternoon, he'll receive notice of legal action for fraud, defamation, and emotional distress. Amanda's breath caught. "And Sumin?" Her employer faced sudden scrutiny regarding workplace violations, nothing fabricated, simply matters that had been overlooked until yesterday. Her apartment building discovered irregularities in her lease agreement. Her social media accounts have been suspended pending investigation into harassment and cyberbullying. The video itself has been scrubbed from every platform and flagged for legal action against anyone attempting to repost it. The methodical recitation should have frightened her. Perhaps it would later. Now she felt only numb confusion. Why? Why would you do all that for me? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither seemed ready to examine. Seong-ho's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You've worked for my organization for 3 years. In that time, you've been nothing but loyal, competent, and kind, even to people who didn't deserve it. You helped Young's daughter with her calculus homework when she was failing. You remembered Dae-jung's mother's 70th birthday and organized a card everyone signed. You treat the security staff and the executives with identical respect. That's rare in my world, Amanda, worth protecting." The way he said her name, not Ms. Okafor, not the formal address he'd used for 3 years, sent something trembling through her chest. A routine developed over the following days. Seong-ho checked on her regularly but never hovered, respecting the invisible boundaries of her grief. He ensured she ate, arranged whatever she needed, but gave her space to process the wreckage of her life. Amanda began noticing things she'd missed during 3 years of careful professional distance. How he listened with complete attention when someone spoke, as if their words were the only sound in the world. How his rare smiles transformed his entire face, softening the harsh angles into something almost boyish. How his hands, capable of the violence she'd witnessed in the garden, handled teacups and books and doorknobs with unexpected gentleness. How he read late into the night, not business reports, but poetry and philosophy, the spines of Camus and Neruda visible on his shelves. Her memories of Ji-hoon played on endless loop during sleepless hours. The early days when he'd been charming and attentive, making her feel chosen in a city where she'd felt invisible. The gradual shift to criticism disguised as concern. Her Korean wasn't improving fast enough. Her clothes were too plain. She didn't understand Korean social dynamics. How she'd made excuses for his distance, his canceled plans, his increasing financial requests. Investing in their future, he'd said, and she'd believed him, because the alternative was admitting she'd been catastrophically wrong. Sumin threaded through those memories like poison in water, always encouraging the relationship while planting seeds of doubt. Ji-hoon seems stressed. Maybe you should give him more space. Korean men can be hard to read. You have to be patient. You're so lucky he doesn't care that you're different. How had she not seen the malice disguised as friendship? One evening, the weight became unbearable. Amanda found herself in Seong-ho's private garden, a pocket of green impossibly transplanted into the city's steel and glass heart. She collapsed onto a stone bench and broke completely, sobs finally escaping the careful control she'd maintained. 4 years in Seoul, and she was exactly where she'd started, alone, with nothing, belonging nowhere. She didn't hear Seong-ho approach. He simply appeared beside her, and after a moment's visible hesitation, sat down. Not touching, not speaking, just present. The solidity of him, the quiet strength, somehow, made it safe to shatter completely. When her sobs finally subsided into hiccuping breaths, words spilled out. I thought if I loved him enough, if I was patient enough, if I changed enough, he'd see me, really see me. I thought I could fix what was broken in him. She laughed bitterly. I was so stupid. No, Seong-ho's voice was quiet, but absolute. That's not stupid. That's hope. The world tried to beat that out of me years ago and mostly succeeded. The fact that you still have it after everything, that's not weakness, that's strength. She turned to look at him properly. In the garden's twilight, his face held unexpected softness. You don't seem like someone without hope. I'm someone who learned to survive without it. There's a difference. He paused, seeming to weigh his words. Hope requires vulnerability. Vulnerability is dangerous in my world. Safer to expect the worst and be pleasantly surprised than to hope and be destroyed. That sounds lonely. It is. The admission seemed to surprise him. That night, unable to sleep, Amanda found herself wandering Seong-ho's penthouse. Light spilled from his study. She hesitated at the threshold, but he looked up and gestured her inside without surprise, as if he'd been expecting her. They talked for hours, about Seoul, how he'd built his empire from nothing, how she'd arrived with everything to prove and no safety net, about loneliness in a crowded city, about survival's many faces, about the walls people built and the reasons they built them. He told her about growing up poor in Busan, about choices made from desperation that became destiny. She told him about her grandmother's death, about arriving in Korea with grief so heavy she could barely breathe, about building a life from scattered pieces. For the first time, she saw him completely, not her boss, not the fearsome figure whose name made people step back instinctively. Just a man, complicated and lonely, who'd built walls so high he'd forgotten how to let anyone in. A man who'd loved books and beauty enough to fill his home with them, despite having no one to share them with. As dawn painted the windows gold, Amanda realized something had shifted. The ground beneath her had been scorched clean by betrayal's fire, but in the ashes, something new was taking root, something dangerous and impossible and entirely unexpected, something that looked remarkably like hope. 2 weeks had passed since Amanda's world had collapsed and been carefully reconstructed within the walls of Seong-ho's estate. She'd moved to his guest house, a separate structure on the property that offered privacy while keeping her close. The initial numbness had begun to thaw, replaced by something more complex, grief layered with anger, humiliation tempered by growing strength. She was starting to smile again, genuine expressions that reached her eyes rather than the brittle masks she'd worn with Ji-hoon. Most evenings, Seong-ho invited her to dinner. Nothing forced or formal, just easy conversation over meals his private chef prepared. They discussed books, argued about films, shared stories from their vastly different childhoods. Amanda found herself laughing, actually laughing, at his dry observations about Seoul's elite and their performative charity work. She told him about her grandmother's superstitions, about growing up surrounded by extended family's chaos and love. Daijung had taken to visiting Seong-ho's office with barely suppressed amusement. You're different around her, he'd observed during a morning briefing. Softer, more human. Seong-ho had glared at him, but the effect was somewhat undermined by the faint smile tugging at his mouth. Don't you have work to do? Always, boss. But watching you rediscover emotions is far more entertaining. The calls began on a Tuesday. Amanda's new phone, Seong-ho had insisted on replacing everything, ensuring her old number was disconnected, buzzed with an unknown number. She ignored it. Then came the texts, seeping through like poison through cracks. Amanda, please, it was a mistake. We were drunk. We didn't mean it. Ji-hoon, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. Please talk to me. Sumin. She blocked the numbers. More appeared. Different phones, same desperate messages. Her voicemail accumulated pleas like debris after a flood. One evening, as she and Seong-ho shared wine in his study, she played one on speaker. Seong-ho had been reading, but set down his book as Sumin's voice filled the room. Amanda, please, you have to listen. I'm so sorry. I was jealous. You don't understand. You were always so strong, so independent. Everyone at work admired you. Seong-ho trusted you with important projects. I felt invisible next to you, like I was drowning in your shadow. When Ji-hoon offered me attention, I was stupid enough to take it. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but you have to understand. The voice cracked, tears audible. I'm losing everything. My job fired me. My apartment management terminated my lease. They said there were irregularities, but I know it's because of what happened. My family won't speak to me. My reputation is destroyed. Please, Amanda, you're the only one who can stop this. You have to help me. You have to convince him to stop. Amanda deleted it without expression. She looked at Seong-ho, whose face remained carefully neutral. She wants me to convince you to stop. She still doesn't understand that actions have consequences that can't be negotiated away. Do you want me to stop? Seong-ho asked quietly. No. The word emerged without hesitation. They destroyed me for entertainment. They filmed it. They celebrated it. They would have forgotten about it the next day while she swallowed hard. While I dealt with the aftermath alone. Seong-ho nodded, something fierce and approving in his eyes. Then I won't stop. Ji-hoon's desperation manifested more dramatically. 3 days later, security alerted Seong-ho that someone was at the property gates, demanding entry. The video feed showed Ji-hoon, barely recognizable, disheveled hair, wrinkled clothes, the polished arrogance stripped away to reveal something feral and frightened underneath. Seong-ho watched from his office window as Dae-jung handled the situation. Ji-hoon's voice carried even from a distance, shrill with panic. This is illegal. You can't do this. I'll go to the police. This is extortion or harassment or something. It's not fair. Amanda appeared beside Seong-ho at the window. They stood in silence, watching the scene unfold. Dae-jung spoke too quietly for them to hear, but Ji-hoon's face paled progressively. He backed away, then broke into a run toward his battered car. No longer the luxury vehicle he'd purchased with Amanda's money, she noted with grim satisfaction. What did Dae-jung say to him, she asked. That if he, returns, he'll face consequences that make financial ruin look like mercy. They watched Ji-hoon's car disappear down the tree-lined drive. Amanda waited for guilt to surface, some remnant of the woman who'd loved him enough to fund his delusions. It didn't come. She felt only hollow relief in the faint stirrings of liberation. That evening, Seong-ho suggested they walk in his private garden. The space was remarkable, a pocket of carefully curated nature that few people ever saw. Stone paths wound between meticulously tended plants, a small koi pond reflected the emerging stars, and strategic lighting created intimate pools of warmth in the gathering darkness. They walked in companionable silence until Seong-ho stopped beside a flowering tree Amanda couldn't name. His hands were clasped behind his back, his posture carrying visible tension. I need to tell you something, he began. I've been wanting to say it for a while, but the timing was never right. I'm not sure the timing is right now either, but I don't think I can wait any longer. Amanda's pulse quickened. All right. 3 years ago during your interview, you looked me in the eye when you answered my questions. Most people can't do that. They're intimidated by my reputation or position. But you met my gaze steadily, answered honestly, showed me exactly who you were without pretense. He paused, jaw tightening. You were brilliant. You are brilliant. I noticed you from that first day. The confession hung between them like something physical. When you started dating Park Ji-hoon, he searched for words, disappointed. I saw him for what he was, entitled, shallow, careless with valuable things. But you seemed happy and I had no right to interfere in your personal life. You weren't mine to protect. Seong-ho. Let me finish, please. He turned to face her fully. When I found out you were getting married, I was in Busan for a business meeting. Dae-jung had to physically stop me from leaving early. He reminded me that you'd made your choice, that inserting myself would be inappropriate and selfish. His hands clenched. When he showed me that video, I've never felt rage like that. Not just because of what they did to you, but because I'd failed you by staying silent when I should have warned you. Amanda's breath caught. You had feelings for me. I have feelings for you. The correction was immediate, precise. Present tense. I'm not good at this, at being open, at being vulnerable. My world doesn't encourage it. Vulnerability gets you killed, or worse. But you deserve honesty, even if it's uncomfortable for me to give. He took her hand carefully, as if it were something precious and fragile. His palm was warm, slightly calloused, completely steady despite the turmoil in his eyes. I'm not asking for anything. You've been through trauma. You need time to heal, to figure out who you are outside of what they tried to make you. I just needed you to know that what Ji-hoon said, that you're not worthy of love, that you should feel grateful someone like him would pretend to want you, it's a lie. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. You're remarkable, Amanda. You're kind without being weak, strong without being hard, hopeful despite every reason not to be. Those qualities are rare, precious. Amanda stood frozen, processing. The past weeks replayed through her mind with new context. Seong-ho's constant presence that never felt suffocating, his care that respected her boundaries, his fury on her behalf that had seemed disproportionate for an employer protecting an employee. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, expression unguarded and achingly tender. I don't know what I feel yet, she said finally, honestly. Everything is still so raw. There's grief and anger and confusion all tangled up inside me. Ji-hoon broke something, and I'm still finding the pieces. Seong-ho nodded, starting to withdraw. His hand, she held on. But, she continued, I know that when I imagine tomorrow, you're in it, and the day after. When I think about the future, even the uncertain, scary parts, you're there. She squeezed his hand. You make me feel safe, not just physically, but emotionally. Like I can be broken and healing and confused, and that's okay. It is okay, he said softly. Can we just see where this goes? No pressure, no expectations about timelines or outcomes, just us figuring it out together. Is that enough for now? Seong-ho's smile was slow, transforming his face into something younger, less guarded. That's everything. They sat on a stone bench beneath the stars, hands linked, both terrified and hopeful about what came next. Amanda leaned her head against Seong-ho's shoulder. He went very still, then carefully shifted to accommodate her weight. They stayed that way for a long time, breathing in sync, hearts beating separate rhythms that were slowly learning to harmonize. 1 month after the garden, Amanda returned to work. Seong-ho had restructured her role during her absence. She now managed legitimate business accounts and oversaw the organization's charity initiatives, carefully insulated from the shadowy operations that funded his empire. The change had been presented as promotion rather than protection, though they both understood the truth. Her colleagues welcomed her back with surprising warmth. The video had gone viral, yes, but so had whispered stories of Seong-ho's retaliation. Ji-hoon's complete destruction had become legend in Seoul's business circles, a cautionary tale about touching what belonged to Seong-ho. No one mocked her now. Some even approached with quiet solidarity, sharing their own stories of betrayal and survival. People respect survivors, Dae-jung told her over coffee, and they fear Seong-ho. The combination makes you essentially untouchable now. It should have felt uncomfortable, being defined by someone else's power. Instead, Amanda found it oddly liberating, a shield she could stand behind while rebuilding herself. She and Seong-ho began officially dating, though they moved with deliberate slowness. Dinners where conversation flowed like water. Walks through neighborhoods she'd never explored. Late-night talks in his study that stretched until dawn painted the windows gold. They were learning each other. Seong-ho discovering how to be vulnerable, how to express emotions he'd spent decades suppressing. Amanda relearning trust, distinguishing genuine affection from manipulation's subtle poison. Their first official date arrived on a crisp Saturday evening. Seong-ho collected her from the guest house, unusually nervous. She could tell by the way he adjusted his cufflinks 3 times before they left. The private gallery showing stunned her into silence. African artists featured prominently alongside Korean ones, bold Afro-futurist paintings beside delicate ink landscapes, sculptural pieces that bridged continents and traditions. Amanda moved through the space, seeing herself reflected in ways Seoul had never offered before. "How did you," she began, turning to find Seong-ho watching her with careful attention. "I called in some favors," he admitted. "Made some donations, convinced some collectors to loan pieces. I wanted you to see yourself reflected here, in Seoul, to know you belong in this city as much as anyone." The thoughtfulness of it, the sheer effort required to create this moment, cracked something open in her chest. Tears gathered despite her best efforts to contain them. "Hey," Seong-ho said softly, thumbs brushing moisture from her cheeks. "Did I miscalculate? I thought, no, it's perfect. You're perfect." She laughed wetly. "I'm crying because I'm happy, which feels miraculous considering where I was a month ago." Dinner followed at a quiet restaurant tucked into Bukchon's winding streets, away from tourist crowds and social media influencers. Over banchan and grilled fish, they traded childhoods like precious currency. Seong-ho spoke about his mother, how she'd worked 3 jobs, her hands permanently rough from cleaning offices and restaurants, how she'd died when he was 17 with nothing but debt to show for her sacrifices. "She wanted me to go to university, become an accountant or lawyer, something respectable, safe." His smile held old grief. "I became what I needed to become to survive. By the time I had the money to become respectable, I'd already built an empire on darker foundations." Amanda shared her own losses. Parents killed in a car accident when she was 12, raised afterward by her aunt until cancer took her 4 years ago. "Coming to Seoul was running away, honestly. Everything at home reminded me of them. I thought distance would make the grief smaller." She laughed bitterly. "It just made me lonely in a foreign language." Seong-ho's hand found hers across the table. "You're not lonely anymore." "No," she agreed, threading their fingers together. "I'm not." Over the following weeks, Amanda was gradually introduced to Seong-ho's world beyond the office's legitimate facade. Not the violent aspects, he kept those carefully separate, but the human dimensions she'd never considered. She met enforcers who were also fathers, accountants who managed both legal businesses and illegal operations, lawyers who navigated gray zones with pragmatic ethics. She attended a dinner where Seong-ho distributed envelopes to the widows of men who died in his service, education funds for their children, mortgage payments, medical coverage. She watched him listen patiently to a young man's request for capital to start a restaurant, saw him approve it without hesitation despite questionable business projections. "You take care of them," she observed later. "They're loyal. Loyalty deserves reciprocity." He paused. "My mother had 3 employers when she died. None of them came to her funeral. None offered to help with her debts. I learned what happens when people are treated as disposable." It wasn't the black and white villainy she'd once imagined from crime dramas. It was complicated, gray, undeniably human, built on loyalty and violence in equal measure, sustaining families while destroying others. One evening, curled on Seong-ho's sofa with tea cooling between them, Amanda found herself excavating the past with new perspective. "Ji-hoon wasn't always cruel," she said quietly. "At first he was charming, attentive. He remembered small details, surprised me with my favorite foods. But gradually, he started criticizing, my accent first, how I pronounced certain words. Then my clothes, my cooking, how I styled my hair, always framed as helpful suggestions for improvement." Seong-ho's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her speak. "Then bigger things. He'd compare me to other women, usually Korean women, and find me lacking. My hips were too wide, my skin too dark, my mannerisms too foreign. But he'd always apologize afterward, say he only wanted me to fit in better, that it was for my own good." The words tasted bitter. Suman would tell me to be patient, that men needed time to adjust to commitment, that I should appreciate his honesty. I didn't realize she was deliberately keeping me insecure, so I'd stay with him while she pursued him herself. "He was breaking you down systematically," Seong-ho said, voice deadly quiet. "Making you doubt yourself so you'd be grateful for his attention. It's a classic abuser's technique. I know that now. Then I just thought I needed to try harder." Seong-ho pulled her closer, his embrace fierce and protective. You were never the problem. You were always enough. Changes emerged in Seong-ho too, subtle but unmistakable. Dae-jung mentioned business shifts during a casual conversation, legitimate acquisitions accelerating, illegal operations being carefully dismantled or transferred, security firms, real estate developments, consulting contracts. The empire's foundations were slowly being replaced, one transaction at a time. Why the sudden transition? Dae-jung had asked Seong-ho directly, Amanda later learned. Because I want to build something that can exist in daylight, Seong-ho had answered. Something that won't put the people I love in danger. One evening, Seong-ho took Amanda to the Han River. They walked along the water as city lights fractured across its surface, transforming Seoul into something magical and impossible. I'm serious about the transition, Seong-ho said, stopping to face the water. Moving the organization away from illegal operations entirely. It'll take years. You can't dismantle an empire overnight without making enemies. But I'm committed. Amanda studied his profile, sharp against reflected lights. Why? He turned to her, expression vulnerable in a way she was still learning to recognize. Because you make me want to be better. Not just appear better for public relations or legal protection. Actually, be better. Build something I'm proud of rather than something I'm simply good at. The confession hung between them, heavy with implications about futures neither had dared imagine a month ago. Amanda reached up, cupping his face gently. I fell in love with you knowing who you are, Seong-ho. Your past doesn't scare me. It made you into someone who understands loss, who values loyalty, who fights for the people he cares about. You don't have to transform yourself for me. Seong-ho's eyes widened, the careful control he maintained slipping completely. You love me? I do. The words emerged certain, solid, real. I think I started falling when you carried me out of that garden. When you were so gentle despite being furious enough to destroy someone. When you gave me space to break without making me feel weak for breaking. He kissed her then, deep and reverent, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious that might disappear if held too loosely. When they parted, both breathing unevenly, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you too, he said quietly. I have for 3 years. I just never imagined you might feel the same. They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the city moved around them. For the first time since the wedding day that had destroyed her old life, Amanda felt truly free, not from pain or grief or the work of healing, but free to choose. 3 months after the garden betrayal, Amanda's life had acquired new architecture. She'd moved into her own apartment, a deliberate choice, needing to prove to herself that she could stand independently before fully merging her life with Seong-ho's. The space was modest but hers, filled with books and plants and furniture she'd selected without considering anyone else's opinion. She and Seong-ho were together most days regardless, their relationship having settled into comfortable rhythm. They'd begun discussing futures in concrete terms, marriage, children, the practicalities of building a life together. These conversations no longer frightened her. With Seong-ho, the future felt like possibility rather than trap. Then, Ji-hoon appeared at her building. The doorman called up, uncertain. There's a man here asking for you. He says it's important. Should I send him away? Amanda's first instinct was refusal, but something in the doorman's tone, pity perhaps, made her pause. What does he look like? Honestly, ma'am, not well. She found Ji-hoon in the lobby and the doorman hadn't exaggerated. He was gaunt, hollow-eyed, wearing clothes that hung loose on his diminished frame. The arrogant posture had collapsed into something defeated. He looked up when she approached, and she saw genuine desperation in his face. Please, he said quietly. Just 5 minutes, then I'll leave and never contact you again. Against every instinct, screaming warnings, she nodded. But first, she stepped aside and called Seong-ho. He answered on the first ring. Ji-hoon is here, she said without preamble. I'm going to hear him out. Can you come? I'm already in the car. Of course he was. Seong-ho always seemed to know when she needed him. Don't go anywhere private with him. Stay in the lobby. He arrived within 7 minutes, traffic laws clearly optional when his woman called. Amanda saw him enter through the glass doors, saw the doorman's posture straighten instinctively. Seong-ho positioned himself near the elevators, visible but not hovering, his presence both protection and permission. Amanda turned back to Ji-hoon. "You have 5 minutes." "I'm sorry." The words emerged raw, unpolished. "I know I can't undo what I did. I know an apology is insulting given the scope of my betrayal. But I need you to know." He swallowed hard. "It started as a game. A stupid, cruel bet born from boredom and privilege. But somewhere along the way, I developed real feelings, genuine feelings for you." Amanda's expression remained impassive, carved from stone. "I was too proud to admit it," Ji-hoon continued, "too concerned with my friends' opinions, with maintaining the facade they expected. Their validation mattered more than it should have. More than you did. And that's my eternal shame." His voice cracked. "I destroyed something beautiful because I was too cowardly to protect it." Silence stretched between them. Amanda studied this man she'd once loved, searching for the person she'd believed him to be. She found only a stranger who'd worn a convincing mask. "You're apologizing because you lost everything," she said finally, voice steady and cold. "Not because you hurt me. If your plan had worked, if Seong-ho hadn't intervened, you'd still be laughing about it with your friends. You'd still have my money. You'd still be treating me like a joke." Ji-hoon flinched but didn't argue. "I gave you everything," Amanda continued, years of suppressed anger finally finding voice. "My money, my time, my trust, my belief that you could be good, that underneath the occasional cruelty was someone worth loving. I stayed through every criticism, every comparison to women you deemed superior, every moment you made me feel small and foreign and wrong." Her hands clenched at her sides. "I convinced myself that love meant endurance, that if I was just patient enough, forgiving enough, accommodating enough, you'd eventually see my worth. But the problem was never that I wasn't enough." She stepped closer, voice dropping but losing none of its steel. "The problem was that you were never worthy of what I offered, and I'm done making myself small for people who can't recognize my value." Ji-hoon's shoulders sagged. Whatever response he'd hoped for, this clearly wasn't it. He nodded slowly, accepting the verdict. "I understand," he said quietly. "For what it's worth, I do see it now. Your worth. I just see it too late." He glanced toward Seong-ho. "He's a lucky man." "No," Seong-ho said, speaking for the first time as he moved to Amanda's side. "I'm a smart man who recognized what was in front of me. There's a difference." Ji-hoon left without further argument, shoulders hunched against weight only he could feel. Amanda watched him disappear through the glass doors and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no residual anger, just profound relief that this chapter was finally, definitively closed. "You did well," Seong-ho said softly, his hand finding the small of her back. "That took real strength." "I needed to say it," Amanda responded, surprised to find herself trembling slightly. "Not for him. For me. To prove I could stand in front of my past and not crumble." A week later, a letter arrived. The return address was a small town 3 hours south. Sumin's hometown, Amanda vaguely recalled. The letter was lengthy, rambling, dense with justifications masquerading as explanations. "I was intimidated by your strength. You made me feel worthless by comparison. My betrayal came from self-loathing, not malice. I've always struggled with jealousy. I hope you can forgive me, not for my sake, but so you can move on." Amanda read it once, carefully. Then she carried it to Seong-ho's fireplace and watched it burn, pages curling into ash. "She wants forgiveness so she can feel absolved," Amanda said, watching flames consume carefully crafted apologies. "But I've already moved on. She just hasn't realized I don't need her permission to do it." Seong-ho wrapped his arms around her from behind, chin resting on her shoulder as they watched the letter become nothing. "You're extraordinary," he murmured. "Do you know that?" 2 weeks later, Seong-ho surprised her with architectural plans spread across his dining table. Amanda studied them, confused, until she saw the header, Second Chances Foundation. "What is this?" "A charity foundation," Seong-ho explained, nervous energy animating his usually controlled movements. focused on supporting orphans, providing job training for formerly incarcerated people seeking legitimate work, funding women's shelters. I want to build it with you. Create something good together, something that helps people like us, people who needed a second chance but didn't always get one. Amanda's vision blurred with tears. She'd witnessed Seong-ho's gradual transformation over the past months, but this felt monumental, proof that change was genuine rather than performative. I have ideas, she said immediately, mind already racing. Scholarships for immigrant women, language training programs, cultural integration support, mentorship matching. Yes, Seong-ho's smile was radiant. All of it. Whatever you want. This is as much yours as mine. They spent weeks planning, and Amanda discovered yet another dimension to the man she loved, his genuine desire to give back, to create positive change, to ensure others didn't face the struggles that had defined his youth. He was building legacy from redemption. On a quiet evening, Seong-ho led Amanda to his private garden, the same space where he'd first confessed his feelings 3 months prior. The plants had grown fuller, summer replacing spring, life continuing its eternal renewal. I want to ask you something, Seong-ho said, taking both her hands. Amanda's heart accelerated, knowing what came next, but still caught breathless by the moment's weight. I want to spend my life with you, he continued, voice steady despite visible emotion. I want to build something real, something good, not the performance I had with business associates, not the facade I maintained for years, something honest and beautiful and ours. He produced a simple ring, elegant platinum with a single diamond, nothing ostentatious. Will you marry me? Yes. The answer required no thought, no hesitation, no doubt. Absolutely yes. He slipped the ring onto her, finger with hands that trembled slightly, then pulled her close. They stood wrapped together as stars emerged overhead, and Amanda marveled at transformation's power. 4 months ago, she'd stood in a different garden, waiting for a man who'd never loved her. Now she stood in this garden, held by a man who'd loved her long before she knew to look for it. Tell me what you're thinking, Seong-ho murmured against her hair. I'm thinking about how much can change when you survive something that should have destroyed you, Amanda said. How betrayal cleared space for something real. How the worst day of my life led directly to the best. They sat on the stone bench, Amanda's engagement ring catching moonlight, talking about their future in concrete terms. 1 year after the betrayal, the same garden venue had been transformed into something entirely new. Traditional hanbok fabrics and jewel tones, draped gracefully alongside vibrant Ankara prints, creating a visual dialogue between two cultures. The fusion menu promised Korean banchan beside Nigerian jollof rice, bulgogi alongside suya. Every detail honored both heritages equally, a marriage not just of 2 people, but of 2 worlds. Amanda stood in the bridal suite, studying her reflection. The wedding dress she'd chosen was nothing like the one from a year ago. This one was powerful, structured shoulders, elegant lines, a design that suggested strength rather than delicacy. She looked like herself, not the woman who'd tried to shrink into Ji-hoon's preferences, but the woman she'd become through survival and love. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Dae-jung entered, unusually formal in his suit. You look beautiful, he said, then produced an envelope. This came for you. 2, actually. Amanda opened the first with steady hands. Ji-hoon's handwriting, as familiar as it was unwelcome. I saw the announcement. You deserve this happiness. I'm sorry I couldn't give it to you. I hope someday I can become someone I'm proud of. J. The second was longer, Suman's careful script filling half a page. I saw your engagement photos. You look radiant, genuinely happy in a way I never saw when we were friends. I don't expect forgiveness. I probably don't deserve it, but I needed you to know I'm getting help. Real therapy, not just the performative kind, trying to understand why I hurt the best friend I ever had. I hope you find peace in your new life. Amanda read both letters, felt a distant sadness like watching strangers from a passing train, then folded them carefully and set them aside. They belonged to a different woman in a different life. She truly moved past them, not through forced forgiveness or manufactured closure, but through the simple act of building something better. Ready? Dae-jung asked gently. Absolutely. The ceremony space had been arranged with careful symbolism. Seong-ho waited at the altar, Dae-jung's place as best man beside him. His organization filled the seats, the family he'd built through loyalty and purpose. Amanda's co-workers, new friends from the charity foundation, and people whose lives they'd touched filled the other side. Two communities becoming one. As Amanda appeared at the aisle's entrance, Seong-ho's entire demeanor transformed. The careful control he maintained, the dangerous authority that made grown men step back, all of it dissolved. He was simply a man in love, watching his future walk toward him with certain steps. The officiant's words washed over them, traditional and modern elements woven together. Then came the vows they'd written themselves. Seong-ho's voice was steady, carrying to every corner. I vow to protect you, to stand beside you, to see you always, not who I want you to be, but who you are. I vow to be worthy of your trust, your love, your presence in my life. I vow to build with you a life of dignity, purpose, and joy. You've made me believe in goodness again, and I promise to honor that gift every day. Amanda's voice didn't waver, clear and strong. I vow to believe in us, in the goodness I see in you, in the life we're creating together. I vow to be your partner, your equal, your home. You saved me in that garden a year ago, but we saved each other in all the days after. I promise to love you with the same certainty I feel right now, forever. The kiss that sealed their promises was tender and fierce, witnessed by two communities learning to become one family. The reception erupted with joy. Dae-jung's toast was surprisingly emotional, his usual stoicism cracking as he spoke about watching Seong-ho transform from a man who trusted no one into someone capable of complete vulnerability. Amanda's closest co-worker spoke about witnessing her rebuild herself with grace and strength. Traditional dances from both cultures filled the evening, African high-life rhythms followed by Korean fan dances, guests from both sides learning new steps and laughing at mistakes. Seong-ho and Amanda's first dance was to a specially commissioned fusion piece, African drums blending with Gyeogyam strings, creating something entirely new from ancient traditions. Outside the venue gates, two figures watched separately from the shadows. Ji-hoon had seen the social media posts he couldn't help viewing, drawn like a moth to flame. Suman had come for similar reasons, unable to resist witnessing what she'd tried to destroy. They saw Amanda radiant with genuine happiness, saw the powerful man who'd chosen her completely, saw the celebration of love they'd both undermined. They understood finally, truly, what they'd destroyed. Not just a relationship, but the possibility of being part of something beautiful. Their regret hung heavy, but it was too late and entirely irrelevant. They left separately, quietly, ghosts of a past that held no more power over the present. Inside, the celebration continued. Late in the evening, Seong-ho took Amanda's hand and led her away. From the crowd to the garden's quiet corner, the exact spot where she'd collapsed a year ago, dress torn and heart shattered. I was so broken here, Amanda said softly, staring at the white runner that had witnessed her devastation. I felt like my life was over, like I'd never recover from what they'd done. Seong-ho pulled her close, his arms secure around her waist. Your life was just beginning. You just didn't know it yet. She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. We were both beginning, really, learning how to be whole instead of just surviving. Fireworks suddenly exploded overhead. Dae-jung's surprise later explained with uncharacteristic sheepishness. Colors cascaded across the sky, reflecting in Amanda's eyes as she tilted her face up to Seong-ho's. I love you, she said, simple and complete. I love you too, he replied. Thank you for letting me. They kissed as fireworks painted the night in brilliant colors, two people who'd found each other in Betrayal's aftermath and built something impossibly beautiful from the ashes. The garden that had witnessed Amanda's destruction now witnessed her triumph, not over those who'd hurt her, but over the pain itself. She'd survived, she'd healed, she'd learned to trust again, and in doing so, she'd found love more real than any fairy tale promised, complicated, hard-won, and absolutely worth every moment of the journey. As the last firework faded and guests' cheers echoed through the garden, Seong-ho and Amanda stood wrapped together, no longer defined by their pasts but empowered by them. They'd taken their broken pieces and created something whole, something beautiful, something entirely their own. The garden held both stories now, the ending and the beginning, the betrayal and the love, the devastation and the triumph. And in holding both, it became sacred space where transformation lived.